Hi, everybody, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I am Chris Gorski.
Today we're going to hear part one of a two-part article about a really, really interesting, but also for me, a little kind of scary author.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about Kazuo Ishiguro's book, Never Let Me Go. And let me say, I am a very big fan of his writing. I've read several of his books. This one caught me off guard because the book I had read previously was a little sad. This book is, honestly, it's heartbreaking, if I could put it in a word.
The word I would use for it is devastating.
Yeah, that's...
Devastating, and that's spelled D-E-V-A-S-T-A-T-I-N-G. D-E-V-A-S-T-A-T-I-N-G. It's devastating, and that's why I could not bring myself to read it.
You know, honestly, hearing his name, Kazuo Ishiguro, this is a Japanese name, clear and clear. All the way through, it's a Japanese name. And when I first read some of his other books, I assumed he has some fabulous translators. Well, no, he moved to England in 1960,
yeah.
And his English is just beautiful. He's a fantastic writer. And even though this is a devastating, heartbreaking book, it is so worth reading. It is fantastic writing.
Because it will make you think about your life, and we can't think about life without thinking about death.
Absolutely. And interestingly, in day two, I'll share a little story that while I was looking at our article, I saw this book in a new light, which made me appreciate it even a little bit more long after I had read it. And we'll talk more about that next time. This is a dystopia novel. This is talking about kind of a future that's not so wonderful. Did you want to spell dystopian?
Oh, I didn't, but I will.
Else?
I'm writing something else, but dystopia is a really good word to know. That means an imaginary world where things are really awful instead of utopia, and that's a world where everything is wonderful. Let's start with utopia, and that's E-U-T-O-P-I-A. E-U-T-O-P-I-A, utopia. That's a world where everything is really wonderful. But here we're going to be talking about a dystopia. And we changed the EU to DYS. D-Y-S-T-O-P-I-A. D-Y-S-T-O-P-I-A. Actually, dystopia is a really, really huge genre in fiction. Dystopian novels.
And interestingly, I've heard that we are currently living in a boring dystopia. We often think of dystopias as being almost like an exciting adventure, even though it's very dark and terrible. We rather live in the boring dystopia.
I think that right now... North America and Europe are living a dystopia.
I just reconnected with a friend through email. I got locked out of my email and got in through a different email and saw my friend had sent me an email 5 years ago.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. And you hadn't seen it.
And I hadn't seen it. And I saw it and I wrote him back. I said, hey, I don't know if you've seen this. Write me back at this email if you can. He replied the next day. And he's living in Brooklyn in New York City. And he says the boring dystopia is real.
It's real, especially in New York City. It's the hot spot practically of the entire world.
Absolutely.
Let's get to our article for today. Our title is Ishiguro's Dark Look at Fate and Time. Now, this is a very, very heavy title. The words are not long, but it carries a lot of meaning and implications, and it'll give you sort of a preview into what is coming. So Ishiguro is his family name. His dark look, that means he looked at it, but it ends up being very, very pessimistic. And fate is the idea that destiny decides what happens to us. And time is obvious. So if you think about destiny or fate, the things that are actually, they have to happen to us. There's no way of avoiding them, and the passing of time. That's really what this book is about. Okay, our first paragraph. Kazuo Ishiguro is a highly acclaimed fiction writer. Born in Japan in 1954, he emigrated to England with his family in 1960. Ishiguro initially dreamed of becoming a musician, but later decided to pursue a career in writing instead. His works often deal with memory, the passage of time, and people's connection to the outside world. In 1989, Ishiguro was awarded the Man Booker Prize for his novel, The Remains of the Day, a fictional story about a British butler who falls in love with a housekeeper during World War II. In 2005, his book Never Let Me Go was selected as Time Magazine's Novel of the Year.
Never Let Me Go is set in a fictionalized version of England during the 1990s. The novel is narrated by Kathy, a 31-year-old woman who works as a carer. Her primary responsibility as a carer is to aid and provide comfort for organ donors. Kathy speaks about her adolescence and her experiences as a boarding school student. She had two close friends back then, Tommy and Ruth. Kathy had a crush on Tommy, but he and Ruth were a couple. Kathy also talks about her old teacher, Miss Lucy, who was fired for telling the students the truth of their lives. She informed the students that they were all clones and that their main purpose in life was to donate their organs. After this mission is accomplished, they would die.
The students have no choice but to accept this fate. Then one day, Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy get a sign of hope. Some older students tell them a rumor that couples can defer donating their organs to extend their lives if they are able to prove they're in love. Now, here it starts getting really devastating.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that later when we get to this part. So we've already gone over our title, Ishiguro's Dark Look at Fate and Time. Kazuo Ishiguro is a highly acclaimed fiction writer. Highly acclaimed means that lots and lots of people agree that he is a really, really good writer. He is famous and people recognize the value of his work. Fiction means novel here, but note that novel is countable. I have read 3 novels this year, but I really enjoy fiction. Fiction is non-countable, so don't say a fiction. A fiction is possible, but it has a very special meaning. So when somebody says, for example, he says he's in love with Mary, but that's a fiction. That means it's not true. That's a special usage of the word fiction. That's not the usual one. If you're talking about writing a story about something that you made up that's not true, that is fiction, not a fiction. That is fiction. It's a genre. It's a type of literature. But if you want to talk about an individual book, that is a novel. Fiction, a novel. Highly acclaimed, very famous, and people recognize his value.
As we saw earlier, he won the Man Booker Prize for his novel, The Remains of the Day. He was nominated for that for another book. And I believe just a few years ago, 2017, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Generally speaking, I trust the Man Booker Prize more than the Nobel Prize for Literature. But hey, he's very highly acclaimed.
That's right. I didn't read the book, the other one, The Remains of the Day, but I saw the movie with Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins, right, yeah.
It was really, really good. And it's so low-key, you don't know where it's going. And then at the end, you get the point. We'll talk about it when we get to it, but the movie is really, really good. All right, next sentence. Born in Japan in 1954, he emigrated to England with his family in 1960. So that means he was 5 or 6 years old when his family left Japan and settled in England. So at that age, you are going to learn English fully as a native speaker. You won't have an accent. You will have complete mastery over the language. The only difficulty is you may not learn your original native language as well, unless he goes to a Japanese school or his parents really work with him and teach him how to read and write. So apparently his English is better than his Japanese by quite a bit. Is that right?
I believe so. In fact, as I was planning on saying later, he actually wrote a book about Japan called The Artist of the Floating World, about Japan, this kind of leading up to World War II, that nationalist period of Japan. But he had not been to Japan in over 30 years. And in fact, he had not returned until 3 years after he completed that book. As far as he's concerned, it's almost a completely unknown country. It's almost like a dream in some ways to him.
Right, but he must have also been very connected to it through his parents.
I imagine so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to our sentence. First of all, born in Japan in 1954. This is modifying Ishiguro. And our subject doesn't come till the next word, he. Emigrated, it starts with an E, pronounced emigrated. That means to leave a country and go somewhere else. So he left with his family, Japan, to England, and they settled in England, with his family in 1960.
Okay, very quickly. When I teach this word emigrated, I also teach two other related words. We have emigrate, which means to leave, as Karen just said. But we also have immigrate, change your E to an IM. And then you have the word migrate. Now, when we emigrate, write this word down and then draw an arrow leaving the word emigrate. Next to the word immigrate, I-M-M-I-G-R-A-T-E, draw an arrow going towards that word because immigrate means to come to a country. And then migrate is like birds. So just draw a little bird there.
Right. And we use migrant often with people who do seasonal work. For example, we have a lot of migrant workers in the U.S. from Mexico and Central America. Okay, the next sentence. Ishiguro initially dreamed of becoming a musician, but later decided to pursue a career in writing instead. So he was definitely headed for the arts in any case. Now, sometimes you really enjoy music and you learn how to play an instrument and sing, but you find you're just not good enough to do it professionally, or maybe it's just not as strong as another interest, and apparently writing won out for Ishiguro.
I suppose he was quite good. He actually had quite a thing going on. He just didn't quite get the music contract that he was looking for. But as we will talk about later, he ended up actually working with another famous musician, writing the lyrics for a famous jazz singer that he admired in a lot of ways that mirrors what happened between Ella Fitzgerald and the famous jazz trumpeter Louis Armstrong.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, so he actually did still contribute to music in a pretty significant way then. So his works often deal with memory, the passage of time, and people's connection to the outside world. These are things that as humans, as living beings, we all have to think about.
Circle that word works, and especially the S. When we have a work generally is uncountable. It means this takes a long time to complete. An artist, a musician, a writer often has works, whereas, every day if you work at a department store or stuff, that's uncountable.
That's right. And related to work, the previous sentence has the expression to pursue a career. So if you need a good verb for career, something that you're going to work on your whole life and become really good at, become professional at, you are pursuing a career in something, maybe in teaching or in flying or whatever it is you're doing. So let's look again at these things that he's really preoccupied with. Memory. That means looking towards the past. The passage of time, that means the past is gone, time moves on. He's thinking about that process. And how you're connected to the outside world. And somehow that strikes me as an especially Japanese thing, because Japanese people, I don't know, they've got a lot of isolation built into their culture. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, absolutely. The Meiji Restoration was when the Westerners, Commodore Perry, forces open Japan pretty much with his gunships. And Japan says, well, we can either remain isolated or change and become a modern society. And that leads into World War II and interestingly ties into Kazuo Ishiguro's life. His parents lived in Nagasaki, one of the two cities bombed in World War II with the atomic bombs. That was 9 years previous to before he was born. That was fresh in their memories.
Right. To move on, in 1989, Ishiguro was awarded the Man Booker Prize for his novel, The Remains of the Day, a fictional story about a British butler who falls in love with a housekeeper during World War II. Now, I don't want to give any spoilers for the movie, but you'll be watching how this affair, these feelings that they have for each other, they develop over time, and you don't see much on the surface, but things are kind of going crazy underneath the surface. You just don't see it up until the end of the movie.
It's fantastic. It still holds up today, even though it's a little bit of an older movie. It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards. It was a seriously big movie that year.
It deserves it.
And Anthony Hopkins, interestingly, still looks super old then and still looks super old now.
It's just the same. Yeah.
He was born a little old man, I think.
He was so perfect in the part.
He's an excellent actor. He's just always looked super old to me.
And the woman who played the maid, she gets very frustrated. Nothing is going anywhere. As though, well, don't you have feelings for me? Well, he does, but it's just not going to happen. And that will drive you nuts when you're watching it. In 2005, his book, Never Let Me Go, was selected as Time Magazine's Novel of the Year.
So I totally have a story for this, but we're going to save it for tomorrow. But let's just say that it was nominated for Times Magazine Novel of the Year. However, it didn't receive another prize, and that made a lot of people really angry.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that tomorrow. Make sure you tune in. Paragraph 2.
So, Never Let Me Go is set in a fictionalized version of England during the 1990s.
So when you read this book, things seem kind of familiar, not so different from the way they are now, especially if you've been to England, are a little familiar with how things are there. So it's something that doesn't look really different or remarkable. So he takes this as a base, but he turns it into fiction, something that he makes up.
That's absolutely right. Fictionalized means it looks and feels like the right thing, the real thing, but there is some twist, and that's usually where the important part of the story comes in. This looks like real England. However, there's something really strange, as we'll see very shortly in this paragraph. Our next sentence says, the novel is narrated by Kathy, a 31-year-old woman who works as a carer.
Now, you didn't see Chris's fingers. He was making air quotes because there are quotes around the word carer here because we don't know exactly what they mean by carer. And by putting quotes around it, it's telling us something weird is going to happen.
Absolutely. And in this book, Kathy narrates the book. She speaks in the first person. So we only see this novel from her point of view. So sometimes we won't see the inner thoughts of other folks, as is the case with Never Let Me Go.
Watch the word narrated because a lot of people say narrated or something. That A is really an A. Narrated. Kathy tells the story. She's talking about her work. Okay, next sentence.
Her primary responsibility as a carer is to aid and provide comfort for organ donors. Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it does. So here we already know that it's already turning into a dystopia, into science fiction, hopefully. So it looks like we've got people who are being kind of raised, taken care of, just for the sake of their organs.
That's right. And that's the twist here. So as a carer, it's like, well, it's wonderful. She's like a nurse and she takes care of people donating their organs to help others. But there's a dark side to this that we'll see here.
A very big one.
Kathy speaks about her adolescence and her experiences as a boarding school student.
So she's talking about how she grew up. And if you're going to a boarding school, that means that you live on the premises. You live in special housing for students. You don't go home every day. Maybe you go home every weekend or once a month or whatever it is, but you live on campus at the school.
So Ishiguro actually worked a short time as a social worker where he met his wife, and he worked with a lot of students and young people that had difficulty finding homes. And it's thought that this experience really shaped his ideas of Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy, our three main characters in this story. And it's kind of interesting to think about that he's pulling this dystopia from his own life. Our next sentence says, she had two close friends back then, Tommy and Ruth.
Now that one's pretty easy. Two close friends. That's a good phrase to know.
Kathy had a crush on Tommy, but he and Ruth were a couple.
Okay, so here we have a triangle. And something has to break somewhere. Something's going to happen. If you've fallen in love with somebody who's with somebody else, you're going to have to make a decision about what you're going to do. Are you going to keep indulging your feelings for that person, or are you going to try to forget them?
When you have a crush on somebody, that means you like them. You're interested in them in a relationship.
But and it's usually one direction.
That's a good point. And Tommy and Ruth were a couple. This means they were dating.
They already had a relationship.
Kathy also talks about her old teacher, Miss Lucy, who was fired for telling the students the truth of their lives.
And now it's getting really creepy because not only do they have something going on with the students there and having to give up their organs or having to die for the sake of somebody else, but they're not allowed to know about it. And if anybody tells them, that person will be dealt with, will be punished, and this person was punished by being fired.
She informed the students that they were all clones and that the main purpose in life was to donate their organs.
So in other words, you were not born from this man and woman who happened to meet each other and fall in love and had children together, but they were actually developed in a laboratory for a specific purpose, and that is to donate organs.
After this mission is accomplished, they would die.
Okay, and that's pretty clear. Mission accomplished, death. Last paragraph, the students have no choice but to accept this fate. Now, this is getting really devastating. You have no way out. You were developed in a laboratory. You're a clone. You're not a person born in the normal way. You have no choice. You're stuck here. Then one day, Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy get a sign of hope. Okay, so here we have a twist. Things are turning a bit. So the three of them are going to have some kind of hope that something maybe can change. Some older students tell them a rumor that couples can defer donating their organs to extend their lives if they are able to prove they're in love. Now, that is really a twist among twists, because if you think about it, people can fall in love fairly easily, especially when they're young. You get a crush on somebody, you become infatuated with them. Infatuate is INFATUATE plus a D, INFATUATED. Infatuated, that means you're crazy in love with them, but it's not a really solid kind of love. But when you're older or after the relationship goes on for a while, if it goes on, you find out things don't work out. And that's how so many relationships end. So this whole issue of finding lasting love, it's what they're talking about and how difficult it is for that to happen.
And what I really like about this twist is that it complicates the general love triangle story. Love triangles are very common in novels and very common in movies, but here it's not just who gets their partner, who gets to have the romantic win, but who will live and who will die.
Right. So who is really in love? And you can't fake that,
right,
according to the premises of the novel. So how do you prove you're in love? And who is it that's really in love? Is it the original couple, or is it Kathy who's got this crush on Tommy?
Now, we will talk about how they determine this tomorrow. However, I wanted to share the quote from Miss Lucy on why she was fired, because I felt this was always quite powerful. It's a little bit long, but bear with me. I think it really shows the beauty of Kazuo's writing here. So Miss Lucy says, "Do you know what happens to children when they grow up? No, you don't, because nobody knows. They might grow up to be actors and move to America, or they might work in supermarkets or teach in schools. They might become sportsmen or bus conductors or racing car drivers. They might do almost anything. But with you, we do know. None of you will go to America. None of you will work in supermarkets. None of you will do anything except live the life that has already been set out for you. You will become adults, but only briefly. Before you are old, before you are even middle-aged, you will start to donate your vital organs. That's what you were created to do. And sometime around your third or fourth donation, your short life will be complete."
Wow.
I just get chills when I read that.
Back to the word that we started out with, or one of them, devastating.
Yeah.
But are we all so different? Because in the end, we all have to face up to death. Maybe we can lengthen our life a little bit or a lot, but in the end, we still all have the same fate. So he's saying that although this sounds so terrible and cruel, in fact, we humans all have to face up to the same issues.
It's a matter of fact. The very next line, Miss Lucy says, "You have to know who you are and what you are. It's the only way to lead decent lives."
Wow. And on that very heavy note, we're going to end for today, but we have a lot more to say about this book and author. But to hear it, you're going to have to tune in tomorrow. I hope you do so.